to improve the position of the animals. So I want you to take a minute first to just, I think, give a warm applaud to the effort that has been put in to put this conference together, to its sponsors, the people who conceived the idea, and most important to yourselves for being here. Let's give everyone a big round of applause. I want to thank Elise for making sure that I'm here. She has been reminding me of how important this subject is, that I should make my presence available. Animals are very important, not only to me, but to our world, to our society, to our living. Imagine a world where every living being, human or animal, has freedom to life without fear, without pain, without suffering. But the world we live in, billions of animals endure cruelty, pain, and suffering, not because they must, but because we allow it. We share the planet with countless different animals and species. Each play a role in the ecosystem, each deserve dignity, and each deserve compassion. But we are far from realizing that this is the way the world should go. In this context, I will speak from the point of view of the law. The law that we make is a powerful reflection of our values that shape the standards of justice and compassion in society. So when we look at our laws, we really see where we place that subject, that topic in our society. So when it comes to animal welfare and their rights, I think we all agree we fall short. Today is the day to start this conversation on what steps and actions we should take, how to change the narrative, and most important, how to change the way we coexist with animals. This conference underscores a collective commitment to addressing the challenges faced by animals, a cause that has long been marginalized. And I think it's important to understand that collectivism is what will take the narrative forward, while each group of people working in their area is doing great work and has brought this narrative forward so that this conference can take place. Nonetheless, today I think the call is for a collective initiative to take place. For Pakistan, the conversation is critical. On the Animal Cruelty Index, Pakistan gets an E, which I'm sure is not a surprise to you, which means that there is poor performance when it comes to welfare standards. Pakistan ranks poorly in all segments of this index, so it's in reducing cruelty, in consuming cruelty, and in sanctioning cruelty, Pakistan fails. The index indicates to me that Pakistan requires urgent reforms in legislation, in policy, in enforcement, and most important, in societal attitude towards animals. We have to change the mindset. When we look at the legal framework, the Constitution does not explicitly recognize any right for animals. The newly inserted Article 9 talks about the environment, a clean and healthy environment, a sustainable environment, but it doesn't recognize animals as living beings of that. More importantly, there is no law in Pakistan that defines welfare. So there's the rights of animals, which is one issue, and there is the welfare of animals. That's another issue. There is no law that defines welfare. There is no law that's framed or looks at welfare in the context of animals. The laws we have look at the requirement of animals from the point of view of how we need the animals, how we will benefit from the animals, how we will use those animals as our resource. The basic law that's quoted everywhere, and then we keep going back to, is the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act, which is the law which has its roots in colonial requirements. It focuses on preventing cruelty, but doesn't look at welfare. And it's important to understand that just looking at cruelty is not enough. You have to look at the welfare of animals. And from the welfare you get to the animal's right. But at the very basic level, the welfare of animals is essential. When I look at myself and I look at the cases and what the role of the courts We protect the environment, protect habitat, protect the ecosystem. When we do that, we recognize that nature has rights. And when we recognize that nature has rights, we actually also should be recognizing that animals have rights. When we speak of human dignity, the right to dignity, we should look at animal rights from this concept that humans must coexist with animals with dignity. So a part of the dignity of humans is the fact how your animals are living in society. So when we look at the right to clean air, to a healthy and sustainable environment, we're also looking at that right in the context of animals. Now, although this way or this interpretation is not rare, but I think it's inherent, and this is something that we should be talking more about, that just as much as humans need clean air, clean water, clean and sustainable healthy environment, so do we animals. So we have to really look at sustainability, and we have to look at the way we are coexisting with animals in a way that first of all looks at welfare and then looks at their rights. Now globally, this is a subject that's also gaining a lot of traction. And in fact, you have big organizations like the UN looking at the work they've done again from the point of view of promoting animal rights. But there is a global legal standard which is accepted everywhere, which is the 5 freedoms of animals. And globally, this is a standard that's quoted when you don't have any standard, that there are 5 basic freedoms that animals must enjoy in every society. The freedom from hunger and thirst, the freedom from discomfort, the freedom from pain, injury and disease, the freedom to express normal behavior, and the freedom from fear and distress. These are 5 very basic freedoms that any living being would want and would need. Again, we go back to our laws. When we look at the laws at the federal level or even at the provincial level, we look at the fact that animals in different capacities, there are laws for animals in different capacities which focus on the need and the use of animals in those capacities. So they basically look at health issues, disease issues, hygiene issues, but they don't look at welfare. And I implore again and again that the welfare of animals, these 5 basic freedoms, this is the basic line. We should be going above this line, not below it. We have to look at the fact that when we discuss law, when we discuss policy, when these decisions are being made on climate change, on environment, even on hygiene and disease, you have to look at the role, the care and the participation of animals. You have to look at the fact that animals play a distinctive role in all these issues, and their role has to be catered to as well. And again, we have to look at the underlying factor, which is the welfare of the animal. Now, as I understand it, the way we look at animals are in, I think, 7 different capacities. We have our livestock and farming animals, we have wildlife, we have pets or companions, we have animals in captivity in zoos and private collections, we have animals used in science, we have recreational animals which we use in so-called cultural practices, and then there are animals used in labor. When we talk of a legal framework, we need a legal framework that covers all these animals, not just the animals in these different capacities, but which covers animals, all animals, and prescribes a basic standard of animal care, of animal welfare, and ensures the 5 freedoms that I just spoke of, that those 5 freedoms are available across the board to all animals. In doing that, I think one of the fundamental things that is missing in our legal framework is a regulatory body. We don't have a regulatory body at all which looks at animals in any capacity. And when I was looking at the dog culling case in the High Court, this is one of the aspects that we talked about, especially when it comes to the buying and selling of animals. I think it's vital that that's an area that is controlled. And although we had started looking at the horrible conditions of the parental market and how to improve it, unfortunately, I was not able to conclude the case. But nonetheless, I think this is something throughout the next 2 days we should talk about, and we do need a regulator. Now, whether it's one or whether it's several, but you need a regulator who's looking at animal life across these 7 categories, the 5 freedoms, and the very basic standard of welfare. In saying what I've said so far, I don't want to undermine the efforts that have taken place at a national level, at a provincial level, and the efforts that are taking place by many of the NGOs that are sitting here. So there is a lot of work being done on rabies. There is a lot of work being done on, if at all there is to be dog culling, it should be in a humane manner. There is a lot of work being done on saving wildlife and endangered species. A lot of work about animals in captivity, saving coastlines, and so on. There's a lot of work, I don't want to name all the different initiatives, but they're great initiatives. And these initiatives and the amount of publicity and traction that these initiatives have gotten over the years shows that we are evolving and we are recognizing that animals do have basic rights, that they do require basic elements of care, and we must look at this. So I'm not going to focus on the initiatives that are taking place, but sort of give to you what I think is a potential area that can be looked at. Before I do that, I want to also mention that the courts have been playing a role when it comes to protecting animals. But again, it's an evolving process. Nonetheless, when we looked at the right to life and the right to dignity, we have that recognized that in this right to dignity and life are the rights of, or the life of species that live not only during the duration of our lives but are available in our habitat, and birds, animals, insects, trees, plants, and so on. So we do recognize them, but we haven't really focused on the welfare aspect, which is something I think going forward we need to do. We have to also recognize that when we talk about environmental changes and climate change, when we talk about disaster management, in all the management legislation, in all the committees, there is no focus on animals, none whatsoever. So we're not looking at what happens to our animals with climate change. We're not seeing how they are suffering because of drought. And they're suffering. You have to connect back to our own use and our own survival. So we're talking about livestock, endangered species, and so on, which you do need. So you can't just ignore them and say, well, let's worry about the humans first and ignore the animals. They're part and parcel of the society, of the environment, of the habitat, and so you have to think about how to save them as well. There is a project now that has also been, that comes out of the New York School, NYU and New York University. It's called the More Than Human Life Project. I don't know if any of you have heard of it, it's called MOS. And it's talked a lot about, in the context of human rights and climate change, which say that there is more than human life that is at stake when we talk about climate change. And it requires, this project requires a revisit to the thinking of human rights, because it says that when you look at the environment and you want to save the planet, you want to save the river and the forest and the tree, then you have to think about what lives in the river and the forest and the tree, and you have to want to save that as well. So this is, again, an evolving jurisprudence that's going to emerge with time, which I believe will gain a lot of attention. But for us, the debate is somewhat more basic. It's somewhat more simple, because we haven't really done much for the animals of our society. We haven't really paid much attention. During the hearing of the dog culling case, the issue actually was very simple. There was a petition to prevent dog culling, and the petition was dismissed by the single judge, and when it came before the division bench, we looked at it in the context of how the culling was taking place, and then in the context of what was happening to the carcass. That's also important. What are you doing with the carcass? Now, I share with you a little bit of my experience that in the first case, nobody knew under which law we were dealing with culling. Nobody knew under which law we were talking about disposing of the carcass, the body of the animal. Nobody knew under which law they were authorized to do all this. When asked why they were doing this and where's the data to support this action, we were told that these animals, they have rabies, and because there's an anti-rabies drive, therefore we have to kill the dogs. There was no data to support that the culling was taking place of dogs that had rabies. There was just a report to say that there is rabies, and because there is rabies and dog biting incidents, we have to kill the dogs. So the question posed was, well, have you thought of alternatives? Nobody had thought of alternatives. Nobody knew which department of government was responsible for this, from the health to the local government to the interior. Everybody was confused. So we had to appoint an amicus. The amicus brought forward a whole range of laws which nobody knew about and said these are all the laws, and there is no law that says you should go around killing dogs or any other animal because you suspect rabies. Incidentally, we even asked that have you looked at how to stop the rabies? Because that's also an issue. You can stop the rabies as well or deal with it. So there was no move or drive to stop the rabies, but there was a drive to kill the animals. Anyway, that initiated a conversation of having a policy on dog culling. It initiated a conversation to create some sort of a control on how societies, just regular housing societies, their guards go around killing the dogs. And for me, the problem was that you're pulling out guns and killing animals in broad daylight on the road where there's public and their children, everybody's seeing that. So it's very, it's not a nice sight for children to see or for people to see. The second problem is, what are you doing with the dead carcass? Now, I happen to be doing another case which shared with us what was happening with that dead carcass. And that was just unimaginable that those dead bodies were being sold at a very limited, small price to people who would then use the bone marrow, crush the bones, and take out from the bone marrow, extract whatever they needed to go on in the gelatin to sell it to companies that are using it. So, you have to really think about it. That, this is how we are proceeding with things. We're okay with dog culling on the streets. We're okay with the carcass being sold. We're okay with small home industries using, drums to extract bone marrow. We're okay with it. And when I say we're okay with it, I mean, do we all think about it? Do we stop for a minute to think this is not the way things are supposed to be done? There's always a better way to do it. One, there's always a way to think about how to deal with the issue moving forward. There are countries to draw examples from. Turkey, Nepal. Just see the way they deal with their stray animals. Stray animals, of course, have become the talk of the day now. There's so much work being done there, and it's good to see the initiatives that people have taken. But again, I say collective, we have to have a collective wisdom that comes out of this conference that puts words into action on moving forward, how to enforce a minimum welfare standard, how to enforce the 5 freedoms, bring it into our legislation, bring it into the policies. So I think the first and foremost thing that should be talked about and should be looked at is how to change the laws. How to bring welfare, define welfare, bring in welfare standards, bring in strict punishments and enforcement against cruelty, acts of cruelty. I think this is fundamental. Cruelty of all kinds should be stopped. It's not good for any society that there is cruelty in that society. At a government level, the issue of animal welfare should be in priority. We must protect our wildlife, we must protect our endangered species. At a local government level, they must consider building shelters and strict enforcement against cruelty, rescue animals, dog culling, but more importantly, how to change the mindset, how to create awareness within the public that this is not something we can just ignore because they're just animals. They're not just animals, they're living beings. So you need legislation. You need policy at every level. You need policy at every level, particularly where there is no legislation. Sometimes a way forward through policy is effective because it gives guidelines on what to do and how to go about it. What you need after that is the most important. monitoring and enforcement. You need data. Before coming to this conference, I was looking for data. I was looking to see what is the state of our animals in Pakistan. Do I have data? And there was none. I could find how many cases of rabies there are, and how many cases of rabies have been cured, and how many dogs we've killed. But there was no data telling me what the overall position of the animals in this country are. Or even if I wanted a breakdown of these categories and how they fare in these categories, there was no data. So I'm hoping that this initiative will also come out. Let's work on enforcement, on reporting, on monitoring, and on creating data. And I think all different NGOs who are working, they should put out their data, and then some collective form of data should come out so that we become better, more aware as citizens as what the plight of these animals are and what our role can be. Research and development is also very important. Research on what the world is doing, examples from other countries, and more importantly, because we live in the global south area, let's learn from regions close by. Let's look at what they do with their animals and how they treat their animals and how they have improved the status of their animals. So research is also important. But I think the biggest challenge is public attitude, is social attitude, public awareness. And this doesn't work by just having a few ads or campaigns. You can't change the mindset. Unfortunately, in our society, in our mindset, animals are not a priority. And how to give them that priority is what is important. Even though they're a part of the livelihood of many people in terms of lifestyle and in terms of labor force, nonetheless, they are not a priority as people. They're not a priority for us as people. We're not really thinking about our animals. We're busy thinking about other things, but not our animals. So I think it's important to understand how are we going to change the mindset? How are we going to work on building these attitudes towards thinking about animals in a more humane manner, animal welfare, looking at the rights of animals, so that everybody understands that animals have rights. We also have to have specialized enforcement wings. This is important because different animals and different categories require different enforcement mechanisms. So you have to have different enforcement wings within the department. So even though we have a Ministry of Climate Change which says it's looking at species and how it's being affected, the question is what have they done for the animals? Where is the enforcement? And again, I'll say that the enforcement is very, very limited. There is no enforcement, and in our entire disaster management plan, there is no plan for saving the animals. We don't even cater to that. So when we're thinking about monsoons, we're thinking about floods, we're thinking about drought, we're thinking about what to do for the people, but we're not thinking about what to do for the animals. So it's vital that we think about these things. And I think rightly said that COVID actually brought this out. We worried about all the humans, but we forgot about the animals. What about the animals? What about COVID during the animals? I have many cats. So I have rescue cats and I have pet cats. And COVID was a very difficult time for me and my cats because I had to think about protecting my cats from COVID, and I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know how to protect them. And so I think that's when you realize that, there is no thinking process here. We're not really thinking about the animals. So, over the next 2 days, as you sit in your rooms, you deliberate and you discuss. Think about what is the minimum standard of welfare care for animals that Pakistan should have. And what are the 5 freedoms that we want to ensure? Are we going to bring those into our conversations wherever they live? Let us all commit to a future where animals are treated with dignity, with respect, and with care. Let us redefine welfare and enact laws which build a society's values that allow other beings to coexist and don't only focus on what humans need, but focus on what everyone needs. Together, if we have the right thinking, if we have the passion, and if we have the will, we can make Pakistan a leader in animal rights, in animal welfare, and we can show the world how well we take care of our animals. Thank you.
important. Now, we would like to present the Honorable Justice of Supreme Court, Ayesha Malik, with the Champions Award for championing the cause of animal and environmental rights in Pakistan.
Please.